Today, we're looking at Diamine Crimson. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Diamine Crimson is a red ink. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into a different pen for a day. I then put that ink into a Cross Baily with a medium nib to take my notes for this video. Before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. And up first is the chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done, and we see kind of a line of a dark pink across the bottom that seems to be holding out a little bit, a light pink push up, and then we start getting some of that very dark red that is known as crimson. But what's interesting is that very light red along the top. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And that line across the bottom is certainly a lot darker. And the area of the lighter red or pink moving up is much smaller. But it goes just as far. We get that same light red across the top. Ultimately, I feel like I don't expect a lot of resistance from this ink. Speaking of resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean out of your pens. And I let that resistance test dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, don't highlight this ink. It doesn't like it. It reactivates, it feathers all over, it explodes, it doesn't look good. Avoid it. Which is expected when you look at what happens with water. With only 30 seconds, most of that ink is coming off the page. We start to see some of the white of the paper. We can't quite see the dots of the rhodia, but it's starting to see little white spots of the paper itself. So I expect it only takes water to get this out of your pens. Pen flush does basically the same thing water does, just a little more blooming as it happens. But I don't think you would need flush to get this from your pens. Bleach completely removes it from the page, leaving some yellow staining behind. For the inks I've tested, I found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9, and Diamine Crimson has a viscosity of 1.2, which makes it super wet. Super wet. It is really closing in on that water line. The water line is a 1. That's a viscosity of 1. That's water. This is 1.2. Holy wet flowing. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done with the extra fine and medium nib on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and rhodia paper. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Diamine Crimson, you ready for this? Has an average dry time of 17 seconds. How does an ink that is so wet have such an average dry time? I don't know, but it's amazing. Now, let's look at the writing samples. So I got this ink in sample form, and to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's look at Clairefontaine. We have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 gives us no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and no shade. The extra fine gives us no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and only very light shading through this. 12 seconds to dry. Now the medium gives us no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and we have no shading here, with 15 seconds to dry. When we look at the Scrubby, we see that the extra fine does give us some shading, and we did get it in the writing. The medium gives us none, which is exactly what it showed. On the smear test, I think you could recover the medium. I think the extra fine would be very difficult to recover. Tomoe River. No bleeding. We have ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, sheen, or shade. The extra fine has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. 19 seconds to dry. And the medium, same thing. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. 23 seconds to dry. The Scrubby for both shows us we're not going to get any kind of color variation, and we didn't. The smear test shows us that we're not going to get to recover this. It's gone. So I look at Rhodia paper. Now Rhodia gives us no bleeding and no ghosting. The 1.1 gives no feather, no spread, no halo, sheen, or shade. The extra fine gives us no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and no shade on this paper, although there was a little shading on the Clairefontaine. We get none here. 14 seconds to dry. Medium gives us no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. 16 seconds to dry. And the smear test shows us we're not getting color variation with either of these, and we didn't in the writing sample. I'm sorry, the Scrubby shows us we're not getting any color variation, and we didn't. The smear says we could likely recover this. Now, this is not my preference of red. So I decided to look at this with some different tone papers. Starting out with the yellow Rhodia, we get no bleeding or ghosting. And when we look at the color difference between on white background and yellow background, it's minimal. Minimal color change for having yellow paper. Just trying to make this more interesting for me as a color. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, sheen, or shade. The extra fine has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and no shade. 14 seconds to dry. Medium, same story, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. 16 seconds to dry. Our Scrubby still shows us that we're not getting any kind of color variation. The smear test says we could likely recover this if we wanted to recover this. So here's the thing I do notice about this particular ink though. As I'm taking my notes, it is a super dark red when you use a very wet nib. It definitely gets quite a bit darker for having a very wet nib. It makes me, want to try the end of the sample into something that's very dry and see what happens with that. But so far I'm very underwhelmed with this. So I went to White Lines paper. White Lines paper gave us bleeding. And with the amount of bleeding that was going on, even in the extra fine, it's to the point of show through. But it didn't touch the page underneath. The 1.1 gave us spread. It gives us minor feathering. It's not distracting, but with the spread, it just makes it hard to read. It gives us no halo, no sheen, and no shade. The extra fine gives us a little bit of spread. It comes up to about a fine. No feather, no spread. No feather, the spread up to the fine. Halo, sheen, and shade. 3 seconds to dry. The medium, spread to a broad. It has no feathering, no halo, sheen, or shade, and there's 3 seconds to dry. Now when we look at the Scrubby for both of these, we don't expect to see any color variation, and we didn't. The smear test says you can recover this if you smeared while you were writing. And that's all that I have for the writing sample. Instead of finding inks that look like Diamine Crimson, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I've chosen Noodler's Blue because it's a great blue. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask if you've enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Diamine Crimson? I think this is a fantastic red. The only problem for me is I actually prefer a scarlet red over crimson red. It's such a minor thing that it's not minor in terms of the color, but it seems so odd. I have a red I prefer, and it's not crimson, it's scarlet. With that in mind, it is a great performing ink and a great red ink. Thanks for watching.